Emma Martinez had always been curious about her family's past, but she never expected her innocent research project to lead her down such a dark path. As a journalism student at Northwestern University, she was working on a documentary about missing persons cases from the 1990s when she stumbled across something that made her blood run cold. She was scrolling through old newspaper archives in the university library's basement, the flickering fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows across the dusty computers. Her eyes were tired from hours of reading about unsolved disappearances when she clicked on an article from the Chicago Tribune dated October 15, 1994. The headline read, "Local woman vanishes without trace, family seeks answers." But it wasn't the headline that made Emma's heart skip a beat. It was the photograph accompanying the article. There, staring back at her from the grainy black and white image, was her mother's face. Not someone who looked like her mother, but actually her mother, Maria Martinez, with the same distinctive scar above her left eyebrow, the same warm smile, even wearing the silver locket that Emma had seen her wear countless times. Emma blinked hard, convinced she was hallucinating from too much caffeine and too little sleep. But when she looked again, the image remained the same. According to the article, a woman named Isabella Romano had disappeared from her Chicago apartment on October 12, 1994. She was 28 years old, worked as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, and had no known enemies. The last person to see her alive was her neighbor, who reported hearing loud voices and what sounded like furniture being overturned around midnight. The problem was impossible to ignore. Emma's mother, Maria Martinez, was very much alive and had never mentioned being named Isabella Romano. More confusing still, according to Emma's birth certificate, she was born in 1995, which meant her mother would have been pregnant with her when this Isabella Romano supposedly disappeared. Emma's hands trembled as she printed the article. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Was her entire life built on a lie? Was Maria Martinez even her real mother? The questions multiplied like cancer cells, spreading through every memory she had of her childhood. She rushed home to their small apartment in Evanston, the printed article burning like fire in her backpack. Her mother was in the kitchen, humming softly while preparing dinner, chicken enchiladas, Emma's favorite. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal after what she had discovered. "Mom," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can we talk?" Maria looked up, immediately sensing something was wrong. She had always been able to read Emma like an open book. "What's troubling you, Mija? You look like you've seen a ghost." Emma placed the printed article on the kitchen table. Maria's face went white as she saw the image of herself staring back from the page. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the sizzling of onions in the pan, which Maria had forgotten about entirely. "Where did you find this?" Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. "The university library. I was researching missing persons cases for a project." Emma sat down across from her mother, studying her face for any sign of recognition or guilt. "Mom, this woman looks exactly like you." "Actually, this woman is you, isn't she?" Maria turned off the stove and sat down heavily in her chair. For the first time in Emma's 21 years of life, her mother looked truly afraid. Not the kind of fear that comes from watching a scary movie or hearing a strange noise at night, but the deep, bone-chilling fear of someone whose past had finally caught up with them. "I never wanted you to find out this way," Maria said, her voice breaking. "I hoped I could take this secret to my grave." "What secret? Are you Isabella Romano? Did you fake your own disappearance?" Emma's voice was rising, months of journalism training kicking in as she fired off questions. "Is Maria Martinez even your real name? Am I really your daughter?" The last question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Maria reached across the table and grabbed Emma's hands, her eyes filling with tears. "You are my daughter. You are the most important thing in my life, and everything I've done has been to protect you." Maria's grip tightened. "But, you're right. I wasn't always Maria Martinez. And the truth about what happened that night in 1994 is more dangerous than you can imagine." Emma pulled her hands away. "Then, tell me. Tell me everything." Maria stood up and walked to the window, peering through the curtains as if she expected to see someone watching them.
Some secrets are buried for good reasons, Emma.
Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud.
That's not good enough anymore, Mom. I found this by accident, but what if someone else is looking for Isabella Romano? What if they find us? Emma's journalistic instincts were screaming that there was a much bigger story here. What happened that night in October 1994?
Maria was quiet for so long that Emma began to wonder if she would answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, as if she was recalling a dream rather than a memory.
I was working the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital.
It was supposed to be a normal evening, just me and a few other nurses taking care of the overnight patients.
But, around 11 o'clock, they brought someone in. Someone who shouldn't have existed. Emma leaned forward. What do you mean? The ambulance crew found him in Grant Park, lying under a tree.
He was wearing a suit that looked like it belonged in a museum, and he was covered in blood. But, here's the thing, Emma, he had no pulse, no heartbeat, and his body temperature was the same as the air around him.
By every medical standard, he was dead.
But, he was conscious, alert, and talking to us like nothing was wrong.
A chill ran down Emma's spine. That's impossible. That's what I thought too. Dr. Peterson wanted to call the police, maybe even the CDC. We had never seen anything like it.
The man, he said his name was Adrian Drackle, insisted that he was fine and just needed to rest.
But, Emma, his eyes. Maria shuddered at the memory.
His eyes were unlike anything I'd ever seen. They were this deep, dark blue, almost black, and, when he looked at you, it felt like he could see straight into your soul.
Emma found herself holding her breath. What happened next? I was assigned to monitor him through the night. Hospital policy, anyone with unexplained symptoms needed constant observation.
So I sat with him, taking his vital signs every hour even though nothing ever registered on any of our machines. He was polite, well-spoken, and seemed genuinely grateful for our help. We talked about books, about music, about life. He was incredibly intelligent and had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world when he spoke to you. Maria returned to the table, but she didn't sit down. Instead, she remained standing, as if ready to run at any moment.
As the night went on, I started feeling dizzy, weak. I thought maybe I was getting sick or just tired from pulling too many double shifts. But Adrian noticed immediately. He became very concerned and kept asking if I was all right.
Around 4 in the morning, I collapsed.
Collapsed? What was wrong with you?
I don't remember much after that. I woke up 3 days later in my own apartment with no memory of how I got there.
The hospital said I never came to work that night. There was no record of any patient named Adrian Drackle being admitted.
It was like the entire evening had been erased.
Emma's mind was spinning. But, you remember it happening.
Every detail.
But, according to everyone else, it never occurred.
I tried to go back to work, tried to pretend everything was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. I started having strange dreams, vivid nightmares about dark castles and ancient ceremonies. I would wake up with knowledge I shouldn't have possessed, languages I had never studied, historical events I had never read about. The kitchen felt smaller now, as if the walls were closing in around them.
Emma struggled to process what her mother was telling her. Then, about 2 weeks after that night, I discovered I was pregnant with you, Maria continued.
But, Emma, I hadn't been with anyone in over a year. There was no way I could be pregnant, yet the tests were positive, and I was definitely showing signs of pregnancy.
Emma's world tilted on its axis. Are you saying that Adrian Drackle is my father? I don't know what happened that night.
I don't know if Adrian did something to me, or if something else entirely was responsible. All I know is that after I found out I was pregnant, strange things started happening.
People would follow me home from work.
I would get phone calls in the middle of the night with no one on the other end. My apartment was broken into twice, but nothing was stolen. Maria finally sat down, looking exhausted by the weight of carrying this secret for so many years. The night I disappeared, October 12, 1994, someone came looking for me. I heard them talking outside my door, speaking in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. They were talking about the child and bringing her home. I knew they meant you, Emma. I knew that if they found me, they would take you away. So you ran. I climbed out the fire escape and never looked back. I had some money saved up, and I drove south until I reached a small town in Texas where no one would think to look for Isabella Romano. I changed my name, created a new identity, and, when you were born, I made sure there was no trail leading back to Chicago. Emma stared at her mother, trying to reconcile this incredible story with the quiet, normal life they had lived together. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I hoped they had given up looking. Because I wanted you to have a normal life. Because the truth is too dangerous. Maria's voice cracked with emotion. Emma, whatever Adrian Drackle was, he wasn't human. And if you're his daughter, that means you might not be entirely human either. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She had always felt different from other people, had always possessed an unusual ability to read people's emotions and intentions. She had attributed it to being naturally empathetic, but now she wondered if there was something more supernatural at play. What kind of abilities? Emma asked, though part of her already knew the answer. You've always been able to sense things others couldn't. You knew when Mrs. Henderson next door was going to pass away weeks before the doctors did. You could tell when people were lying to you even as a small child. And your eyes, Emma, sometimes when you're concentrating or upset, your eyes change color just like his did. Emma ran to the bathroom mirror and stared at her reflection. Her eyes were their normal brown color, but as she focused on the memory of Adrian Drackle's dark blue gaze, she watched in horror as her own eyes began to shift, deepening to an almost black shade that was definitely not human. She stumbled back into the kitchen, her legs unsteady. This can't be real. People don't just change eye color. Vampires don't exist. I never said he was a vampire, Maria replied quietly. But, now that you mention it, that would explain a lot of things. The lack of vital signs, the superhuman strength I sensed in him, the way he seemed to command respect from everyone around him even though we had just met. Emma sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning. So what do we do now? Do we keep running? Do we try to find out more about Adrian Drackle? Maria was quiet for a long moment. I think the choice has already been made for us, Mija. You found that article for a reason. Maybe it's time we stopped running and started looking for answers. But, you said it was dangerous. It is dangerous. But, you're not a helpless baby anymore, Emma. You're a strong, intelligent young woman who deserves to know the truth about her heritage. And if Adrian Drackle is still alive, if he's been looking for us all these years, then maybe it's time we found him first. Emma looked at her mother with new eyes, seeing her not just as the woman who had raised her, but as Isabella Romano, a nurse who had stumbled into something supernatural and had spent over 20 years protecting her daughter from forces she didn't understand. Where do we start? Emma asked. Maria smiled for the first time since seeing the newspaper article. We start by going back to Chicago. We start by finding out what really happened that night at St. Mary's Hospital. And we start by discovering who Adrian Drackle really is. As they sat in their small kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of their normal life, Emma felt something shifting inside her. It was as if a door that had been locked for her entire life was finally beginning to open. Whatever lay beyond the door might be dangerous, but it was also the truth about who she was and where she came from. The photograph from the newspaper lay on the table between them like a bridge between their past and their future. Isabella Romano's face stared up at them, a reminder that some secrets are too powerful to stay buried forever. Emma picked up the article and studied her mother's younger face one more time. When do we leave for Chicago? Tomorrow, Maria replied without hesitation. We've been running from this for 21 years. It's time to stop running and start getting some answers. Outside their apartment window, the sun was setting over Evanston, casting long shadows across the street.
Emma couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in those shadows, someone was watching them, waiting for them to make their next move. The thought should have terrified her, but, instead, she felt a strange sense of anticipation. For the first time in her life, she was about to discover who she really was. And, despite the danger that might be waiting for them in Chicago, Emma Martinez, or whoever she truly was ready to face whatever came next. The drive to Chicago took Emma and Maria 14 hours, with stops only for gas and restroom breaks. Neither of them slept much during their final night in Evanston, both lost in their own thoughts about what they might discover once they returned to the city where Isabella Romano had disappeared 21 years ago. Emma had spent most of the journey researching everything she could find about St. Mary's Hospital, Adrian Drackle, and unexplained disappearances in Chicago during the 1990s. Her laptop battery had died twice, forcing her to use charging stations at gas stations while Maria paced nervously nearby, constantly checking over her shoulder as if expecting to see familiar faces from her past. As they crossed into Illinois, Emma noticed her mother becoming increasingly tense. Maria's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles were white, and she jumped every time another car got too close to them on the highway. "Are you okay, Mom?" Emma asked, closing her laptop and focusing on the woman who had raised her. "I never thought I'd come back here," Maria admitted, her voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. "For 21 years, I've had nightmares about this city. About him finding us." Emma reached over and placed a comforting hand on her mother's shoulder. "We're doing this together. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." They had booked a room at a small motel on the outskirts of Chicago, far enough from the city center to avoid immediate recognition but close enough to begin their investigation. The Sunshine Motor Lodge was exactly the kind of anonymous, forgettable place where two people trying to stay under the radar could blend in completely. Their room was small and dated, with faded wallpaper and furniture that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. But it was clean and private, and, most importantly, it gave them a base of operations for what they were about to attempt. Emma spread her research materials across the small table by the window while Maria unpacked their few belongings. They had traveled light, bringing only essentials and leaving everything else behind in case they needed to run again quickly. "I found some interesting information during the drive," Emma said, organizing her printouts and notes. "St. Mary's Hospital closed down in 1998, just 4 years after you disappeared. According to several news articles, there were allegations of illegal medical experiments and patient abuse." Maria looked up from her unpacking. "What kind of experiments?" "The articles are pretty vague, but there are mentions of unauthorized blood work, patients being given experimental medications without consent, and several unexplained deaths. The hospital administration claimed it was all false accusations from disgruntled former employees, but the state medical board apparently found enough evidence to revoke their license." Emma pulled out a newspaper clipping from 1998. "Look at this, the final article about the hospital's closure. Dr. Peterson is mentioned as one of the physicians under investigation. Wasn't he the doctor you said wanted to call the police about Adrian?" Maria took the clipping and studied it carefully. "Yes, that's him. Dr. Richard Peterson. He was the head of emergency medicine." Her face grew thoughtful. "If the hospital was conducting illegal experiments, maybe what happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. Maybe Adrian wasn't the only unusual patient they dealt with." Emma had been thinking the same thing. "I also found this," she said, pulling out another document. "It's a list of all the nurses who worked at St. Mary's during 1994. Your name, Isabella Romano, is on the list, along with contact information. Most of the addresses are probably outdated, but some of these people might still be in Chicago." They spent the rest of the evening planning their approach. Emma would visit the site where St. Mary's Hospital used to stand, while Maria would try to track down some of her former colleagues who might remember something about that night. They agreed to meet back at the motel by 6 o'clock to share whatever information they had gathered. The next morning, Emma took the L train into downtown Chicago. The city was busier and more vibrant than she had expected, with people rushing to work and tourists taking pictures of the famous architecture. It was hard to imagine that somewhere in this bustling metropolis,
her mother had once lived a completely different life under a completely different name. The address where St. Mary's Hospital used to stand was now occupied by a modern office building called Renaissance Plaza. Emma stood on the sidewalk, trying to picture the hospital that had once been there, where her mother had met the mysterious Adrian Drackle and her own strange existence had somehow begun. She approached the security guard in the lobby, a friendly-looking man in his 50s named James according to his name tag. "Excuse me," Emma said, putting on her best journalism student smile. "I'm working on a research project about Chicago medical history. I understand there used to be a hospital on this site?" James nodded. "Oh sure, St. Mary's. I actually worked security there for about 3 years before it closed down. Strange place, that hospital. Always gave me the creeps, especially the night shift." Emma's pulse quickened. "Really? What was creepy about it?" "Well, you didn't hear this from me," James said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, "but there were always rumors about weird stuff happening on the upper floors. Patients who came in with one condition and left with something completely different. People who should have died but walked out like nothing happened." "And the basement?" He shuddered. "What about the basement?" "They said it was just storage and some administrative offices, but I swear I heard voices down there sometimes when I was doing my rounds. Voices speaking languages I'd never heard before. And there were always these fancy cars parked in the back alley, expensive European models that you don't usually see at a hospital." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you remember anything specific from October 1994? James thought for a moment. "October 94, that was around the time that nurse disappeared, wasn't it? Isabella something? Isabella Romano. Did you know her? Sweet girl, real dedicated to her patients. I remember the night she vanished because it was such a big deal. The police came, federal agents, even some guys in suits who didn't show any identification. They interviewed everyone, searched the entire building, but they never found any trace of her." Emma's heart was racing now. Federal agents? Why would federal agents be interested in a missing nurse? That's what we all wondered. But here's the really weird part: about a week after she disappeared, they brought in this team of contractors to completely renovate the basement. Worked around the clock for about 2 weeks, and when they were done, the entire layout was different. Rooms that used to be there were gone, new rooms had appeared, and they installed this fancy new security system that none of us regular staff had access to. James leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, I think Isabella Romano saw something she wasn't supposed to see. And whoever was running those experiments in the basement made sure she couldn't tell anyone about it." Emma thanked James and left the building, her mind reeling with new information. If there had been some kind of cover-up after her mother's disappearance, it meant that Adrian Drackle might have been connected to something much larger than just one mysterious patient. She spent the rest of the morning walking around the neighborhood, trying to find anyone else who might remember St. Mary's Hospital or Isabella Romano. At a coffee shop 2 blocks away, she struck up a conversation with an elderly woman named Dorothy who had lived in the area for over 40 years. "Oh, I remember that hospital," Dorothy said when Emma mentioned St. Mary's. "My late husband worked there as a janitor for almost 10 years. He used to come home with the strangest stories about that place." "What kind of stories?" "Well, Harold, that was my husband, he said there were certain floors he was never allowed to clean. And sometimes, late at night, he would see people in the hallways who didn't look like regular patients or staff. They were always impeccably dressed, spoke with foreign accents, and moved like they owned the place." Dorothy stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Harold used to joke that the hospital was run by vampires because most of the important meetings seemed to happen after midnight, and the people in charge never seemed to age. I thought he was just being silly, but after that nurse disappeared and the hospital closed down so suddenly, I started wondering if maybe Harold had been more observant than I gave him credit for." Emma nearly choked on her own coffee. "Did your husband ever mention the name Adrian Drackle?" Dorothy's eyes widened. "How did you know that name?" "Harold only mentioned him once, and I made him promise never to speak about it again." "What did he say about Adrian Drackle?"
Harold was working late one night, probably around 1994 or 1995, when he saw this man in the elevator. Tall, dark hair, wearing an expensive suit that looked like it belonged in a movie about old European aristocrats. The man introduced himself as Adrian Drackle and asked Harold about his family, his children, his wife. Harold said the man was polite and charming, but there was something about his eyes that made Harold feel like he was looking at a predator. Dorothy paused, seeming to wrestle with whether to continue. Harold said that Adrian Drackle knew things about our family that no stranger should have known. He knew that our daughter lived in California, he knew that Harold had served in Vietnam, he even knew that I had been in the hospital the previous year for surgery. When Harold asked how he knew these things, Adrian just smiled and said that he made it his business to know about the people who worked in his building. Emma's blood ran cold. His building? That's what Harold said. Adrian Drackle referred to S.A. Mary's hospital as his building, like he owned it or controlled it somehow. After that night, Harold started paying more attention to the comings and goings, and he realized that Adrian Drackle seemed to have unlimited access to every part of the hospital, including areas that were supposed to be restricted to authorized personnel only. Emma thanked Dorothy and left the coffee shop with her head spinning. Everything she was learning pointed to Adrian Drackle being much more than just a mysterious patient. He seemed to have been connected to the hospital in some official capacity, possibly even running whatever illegal experiments had eventually led to St. Mary's closure. Meanwhile, Maria was having her own revelations across town. She had managed to track down Sandra Walsh, one of the nurses who had worked the night shift with Isabella Romano back in 1994. Sandra was now in her early 60s and working as a hospice nurse, but she remembered that night at St. Mary's with crystal clarity. Isabella Romano, Sandra said when Maria introduced herself using her real name. I wondered what happened to you. One day you were there, and the next day it was like you had never existed. They were sitting in Sandra's small apartment, drinking tea and looking through old photographs from their time at St. Mary's. I need to know what you remember about the night I disappeared, Maria said. Specifically about a patient named Adrian Drackle. Sandra's face went pale. You're the second person to ask me about that name in the last 6 months. Maria felt a chill run through her. Someone else has been asking about Adrian Drackle? A man came to see me back in September. Tall, well-dressed, with these incredibly intense eyes. He said he was a private investigator looking into some old hospital records, but there was something about him that didn't feel right. He knew too much about that night, about things that weren't in any official reports. Sandra got up and walked to her window, peering out at the street below. Isabella, I think you should know that since that man's visit, I've been having strange experiences. I'll come home and find that someone has been in my apartment, even though nothing is missing and there's no sign of forced entry. I get phone calls at odd hours where no one speaks, but I can hear breathing on the other end. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I see someone watching my building from across the street. Maria joined her at the window. Sandra, what do you remember about Adrian Drackle? What really happened that night? I remember everything, even though I've tried to forget. Dr. Peterson brought him into the emergency department around 11:30. The ambulance crew said they found him in Grant Park, unconscious and covered in blood. But, Isabella, when they brought him in, he wasn't unconscious at all. He was fully alert and talking to everyone like he was hosting a dinner party instead of being treated for mysterious injuries. Sandra returned to her chair, wrapping her sweater more tightly around herself as if she was cold. The blood work came back completely normal, but that was impossible because we couldn't detect any heartbeat or blood pressure. Dr. Peterson was convinced there was something wrong with our equipment, so he had me run the tests 3 different times. Same result every time, this man was medically dead but behaving like he was perfectly healthy. Maria leaned forward. What happened while I was monitoring him? That's the strange part, Isabella. You were supposed to check on him every hour, but around 2 in the morning, you stopped coming to the nurse's station to document your observations. When I went to check on you, I found you sitting in his room having what looked like an intense conversation. You seemed different. Distracted, almost hypnotized. Sandra paused, as if she was reluctant to continue. I tried to get your attention, but it was like you couldn't hear me. Adrian Drackle looked at me and asked me to give you two some privacy. His voice was so compelling that I found myself walking away even though every instinct told me I should stay and make sure you were okay. Maria felt pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. How long was I alone with him? The next time I saw you was around 4 in the morning when you collapsed in the hallway. But, Isabella, you look like you had aged 10 years in those 2 hours. You were pale, weak, and there were these small puncture wounds on your neck that definitely hadn't been there earlier. Maria's hand instinctively went to her neck, where she could still feel the faint scars that she had always attributed to a childhood accident. Dr. Peterson wanted to admit you for observation, but Adrian Drackle insisted on examining you himself. He claimed to be a doctor, though he never showed us any credentials. He spent about 20 minutes alone with you while you were unconscious, and, when he came out, he said you would be fine but needed to rest at home. Sandra's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Isabella, I think Adrian Drackle did something to you that night. Something that changed you permanently. And I think whatever he did is connected to why you disappeared and why someone is looking for you now. Maria felt a wave of dizziness wash over her as suppressed memories began to surface. She remembered being in that hospital room, feeling drawn to Adrian Drackle in a way that defied explanation. She remembered his voice, smooth and hypnotic, asking her questions about her life, her dreams, her deepest desires. And she remembered a moment of pain, sharp and brief, followed by a sensation of profound connection to something ancient and powerful. Sandra, do you think Adrian Drackle is still alive? Do you think he's the one who's been looking for me? I don't just think it, Isabella. I know it. Sandra walked to her bedroom and returned with a photograph. This was taken outside my building 3 nights ago by my neighbor's security camera. The photograph showed a tall, dark-haired man in an expensive suit standing under a streetlight. Even though the image was grainy and taken from a distance, Maria recognized him immediately. Adrian Drackle looked exactly the same as he had 21 years ago, not a day older, not a single change in his appearance. That's impossible, Maria whispered. People don't stay the same for over 20 years. People don't, Sandra agreed. But, whatever Adrian Drackle is, I don't think he's entirely human. And, Isabella, I think he's been looking for you and your daughter for a very long time. Maria stared at the photograph, feeling the weight of 21 years of running and hiding settling on her shoulders. She had always known this day would come, had always known that eventually her past would catch up with her. But, seeing Adrian Drackle's unchanged face staring back at her from the photograph made the danger feel immediate and real in a way it never had before. What do you think he wants? Maria asked. I think he wants Emma, Sandra said quietly. I think whatever he did to you that night was meant to create something, and Emma is the result. I think he's been waiting for her to grow up, and now he's ready to claim what he believes belongs to him. Maria felt her protective instincts flaring to life. I won't let him near my daughter. Isabella, I don't think you'll have a choice. If Adrian Drackle is what I think he is, if he's some kind of vampire or supernatural being, then he has resources and abilities that we can't even imagine. You can't fight something like that with conventional weapons or by running away. Sandra reached across the table and grasped Maria's hand. But maybe you don't have to fight him. Maybe there's another way. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time you stopped running and started negotiating. Maybe Adrian Drackle isn't the monster you think he is. Maybe he's been looking for you all these years because he wants to be part of Emma's life, not destroy it. The suggestion hung in the air between them like a challenge. Maria had spent over 2 decades viewing Adrian Drackle as a threat to be avoided at all costs. The idea that he might have legitimate reasons for seeking them out had never occurred to her. How could I possibly trust him after what he did to me? I don't know, Sandra admitted. But, Isabella, you can't run forever. And, now that Emma knows the truth about her heritage, don't you think she deserves the chance to meet her father and decide for herself what kind of relationship, if any, she wants to have with him? As Maria walked back to the motel that evening, Sandra's words echoed in her mind. For the first time in 21 years, she began to consider the possibility that Adrian Drackle might not be the enemy she had always believed him to be. When she arrived at the Sunshine Motor Lodge, she found Emma waiting for her with a laptop full of research and a notebook filled with questions. As they shared what they had learned during their respective investigations, both women realized that they were no longer just searching for answers about the past. They were preparing to confront a future that would change everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. And, somewhere in the shadows of Chicago, Adrian Drackle was waiting for them to make their next move. Emma and Maria spent their second night in Chicago planning their next move. The information they had gathered painted a picture of Adrian Drackle as a powerful, possibly immortal being who had been systematically searching for them for over 2 decades. The question now was whether they should continue trying to hide or finally confront him directly. Emma had been studying the photographs Sandra had given them, analyzing every detail of Adrian Drackle's unchanged appearance. As a journalism student, she was trained to look for evidence and logical explanations, but everything about this situation defied conventional logic. "Mom, I've been thinking about what Sandra said," Emma began as they sat in their motel room, the photographs spread out on the small table between them. "Maybe she's right. Maybe it's time we stopped running and started looking for answers directly from the source." Maria looked up from the old hospital records they had obtained. "Emma, you don't understand how dangerous he is. What if he tries to hurt you? But what if he doesn't?" Emma countered. "What if he's been looking for us because he wants to know his daughter, not because he wants to harm us? We've been operating under the assumption that he's dangerous based on fear and 21 years of uncertainty. But we don't actually know what his intentions are." Emma had spent hours researching vampire mythology and supernatural creatures, trying to understand what they might be dealing with. "According to everything I've read, vampires aren't necessarily evil. In many cultures, they're seen as protectors or guardians. What if Adrian Drackle falls into that category?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, considering her daughter's words. "Even if his intentions are good, Emma, the fact remains that he did something to me that night without my consent. He changed me in ways I still don't fully understand, and he created you through means that seem impossible. That's exactly why we need to talk to him," Emma insisted. "I need to understand what I am, Mom. These abilities I have, the way my eyes change color, the way I can sense things about people, it's all connected to him, isn't it? And if I'm going to learn to control whatever is happening to me, I need answers that only he can provide." Emma stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "I've made a decision. I'm going to find Adrian Drackle and ask him to meet with us. I'm going to give him the opportunity to explain himself." "How do you plan to find him? We don't even know where he is." Emma turned back to her mother with a determined expression. "I think he's been watching us since we arrived in Chicago. I've had this feeling ever since we got here that someone is following us, observing our movements. If I'm right, then all I have to do is make it known that I want to meet with him." That evening, Emma put her plan into action. She walked to the park across from their motel and sat on a bench under a streetlight, making herself visible and vulnerable. She had written a letter addressed to Adrian Drackle, and she held it in her hands like an offering. "I know you're out there," she said, speaking to the darkness around her. "I know you've been looking for us, and I know you probably know exactly where we are right now. My name is Emma Martinez, but I think you might know me by another name. I think you might be my father." The park was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Emma continued speaking, hoping that somehow her words would reach the person she was trying to summon. "I want to meet with you. I want to understand what happened 21 years ago, and I want to know what I am. But I want to do this on neutral ground, somewhere public where my mother will feel safe. If you're listening, if you can hear me, please find a way to contact us." Emma placed the letter on the bench and walked back to the motel, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had no idea if her plan would work, but something deep inside her told her that Adrian Drackle was indeed watching them and that he would respond to her invitation. The next morning, Emma and Maria found an elegant envelope that had been slipped under their motel room door.
It was made of expensive paper and sealed with dark red wax.
Emma's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The letter inside was written in beautiful old-fashioned handwriting. My dear Emma, your courage in reaching out to me is admirable and confirms everything I have hoped about the woman you have become. I have indeed been watching over you and your mother, though from a respectful distance, waiting for the right moment to make contact. I understand your need for answers, and I am prepared to provide them. However, this conversation is long overdue and will require time and privacy to address properly. If you are truly ready to learn the truth about your heritage and your destiny, meet me tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. at the Blackstone Hotel, in the presidential suite on the 23rd floor. Come alone, but know that your mother is welcome to wait in the lobby if that would provide her comfort. I give you my word that you will come to no harm.
I have waited 21 years to meet you properly, and I would never do anything to jeopardize this opportunity. With sincere regards and paternal affection, Adrian Drackle. Emma read the letter twice before showing it to her mother. The handwriting was elegant and refined, and the tone was formal but warm. Nothing about it suggested danger or malicious intent.
He wants me to come alone, Emma said, handing the letter to Maria.
Maria read it carefully, looking for any sign of deception or threat.
The Blackstone Hotel is one of the most prestigious hotels in Chicago. It's very public, very secure. If he meant to harm you, he probably wouldn't choose such a visible location.
Emma could see that her mother was wrestling with conflicting emotions, the protective instinct that had kept them safe for 21 years battling against the recognition that Emma was an adult who had the right to make her own decisions about her life.
What do you think I should do? Emma asked. Maria was quiet for several minutes, staring at the letter.
Finally, she looked up at her daughter with tears in her eyes.
I think it's time, Mija. I think it's time you met your father. The next evening, Emma dressed carefully for what might be the most important meeting of her life.
She chose a simple but elegant black dress and the silver locket that her mother had worn in the photograph from 1994. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she noticed that her eyes were already beginning to shift to that darker, more intense color that seemed to appear when she was emotionally heightened. Maria drove her to the Blackstone Hotel, and they sat in the car for a few minutes, both of them gathering courage for what was about to happen. If anything goes wrong, if you feel unsafe for even a moment, you call me immediately, Maria said, squeezing Emma's hand.
I will, Mom. I promise.
Emma walked into the elegant lobby of the Blackstone Hotel, feeling underdressed despite her careful preparation. The hotel was exactly the kind of place where Adrian Drackle seemed like he would belong, old-world elegance with modern luxury, the kind of establishment that catered to people of wealth and influence. She took the elevator to the 23rd floor, her heart pounding with every floor they passed. When the doors opened, she found herself in a private hallway with only one door, the presidential suite. She knocked softly, and the door opened immediately, as if Adrian Drackle had been waiting just on the other side. The man who greeted her was exactly as he had appeared in Sandra's photograph, tall, elegant, with dark hair and those intensely blue eyes that Maria had described. But, seeing him in person, Emma was struck by how familiar he seemed, as if she had been looking at her own reflection in some ways. Emma, he said, his voice rich and warm with what sounded like genuine emotion. You are even more beautiful than I had dared to hope. The suite was spacious and luxuriously appointed, with floor-to-ceiling windows that provided a stunning view of the Chicago skyline. Adrian Drackle gestured for Emma to sit in one of the comfortable chairs near the window. Thank you for coming, he said as he sat across from her. I know this must be difficult for you. Emma studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or malevolent intent. What she saw instead was a man who appeared to be in his 30s, impeccably dressed and extraordinarily handsome, but with eyes that held the weight of centuries. Are you my father? Emma asked, deciding to start with the most direct question. Yes, Adrian replied without hesitation. Though the circumstances of your conception were unconventional. Are you a vampire? Adrian smiled at her directness. I am what your modern world would call a vampire, though the reality is far more complex than the myths and legends would suggest. I am part of an ancient bloodline that has existed for over 3,000 years.
Emma felt a strange sense of relief at finally getting straight answers. What did you do to my mother that night at the hospital? Adrian's expression became more serious.
I formed a blood bond with your mother, though not entirely intentionally. I was badly injured that night, poisoned by enemies who were trying to kill me. Your mother's compassion and medical care saved my life, but, in my weakened state, I lost control of abilities that I normally keep carefully contained. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. The blood bond created a connection between us that resulted in your conception. In our kind, this is how new bloodlines are created, but it typically only happens when both parties are willing participants who understand the consequences. What happened with your mother was an accident, though I take full responsibility for not having better control of my abilities.
Emma processed this information, trying to understand the implications. So I'm half vampire?
You are something that is quite rare in our world, a damper, the child of a vampire and a human. You possess many of our abilities but, without some of our more significant limitations. You can walk in sunlight, you can consume normal food, and you have the potential for a normal human lifespan if you choose. Adrian returned to his chair, leaning forward with obvious interest in her reaction. But, you also have enhanced strength, speed, and sensory abilities. You can influence human emotions and read their intentions. And, as you've probably noticed, your eyes change color when you access these abilities. Emma had dozens of questions, but one stood out above the rest.
Why didn't you contact us sooner? Why did you let my mother think you were dangerous?
Because I am dangerous, Emma. Not to you or your mother specifically, but I am part of a world that operates by rules and codes that humans cannot easily understand. I have enemies who would use you against me, and I have responsibilities to my people that sometimes require me to make choices that would seem harsh or incomprehensible to humans. Adrian's voice took on a tone of regret.
I stayed away because I wanted to give you the chance to have a normal human life.
I watched from a distance, ensuring your safety but never interfering. I had hoped that you might never manifest the supernatural aspects of your heritage.
But I have manifested them.
Yes, and quite powerfully. Which means that whether you choose to embrace this part of yourself or not, you will need training to control your abilities.
Untrained dampiers can be dangerous to themselves and others. Emma felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning. What kind of training?
I could teach you to control your enhanced senses so they don't overwhelm you in crowded spaces. I could show you how to influence human emotions without accidentally manipulating people you care about. I could help you understand the extent of your physical abilities and how to use them safely.
Adrian paused, studying Emma's face carefully.
But, more than that, I could introduce you to others of our kind.
You are not alone in this world, Emma.
There are others like you, and there is a community where you would be accepted and understood. The offer was tempting, but Emma thought about her mother waiting downstairs in the hotel lobby.
What about my mother? What about the life we've built together?
Your mother is welcome in my world if she chooses to be part of it. The blood bond we share means that she has been gradually developing some enhanced abilities of her own over the years.
She is no longer entirely human, though she may not fully realize it yet. Emma stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city where her mother had once lived as Isabella Romano. This is a lot to process. I understand. I don't expect you to make any decisions tonight. But, Emma, I want you to know that I have loved you from the moment I learned of your existence.
Everything I have done, including staying away, has been motivated by my desire to protect you and give you choices.
Adrian joined her at the window. You have a choice now.
You can return to your life with your mother and continue as you have been, and I will respect that decision and continue to ensure your safety from a distance. Or you can choose to explore this part of your heritage, to learn about your abilities and your place in a larger supernatural community. Emma looked at this man who was her father, trying to reconcile everything she had believed about him with the reality of his presence. He was undoubtedly powerful and probably dangerous to his enemies, but he seemed genuinely caring toward her.
Can I have some time to think about it?
Of course.
Take all the time you need.
Adrian reached into his jacket and pulled out an elegant business card.
This is how you can contact me when you've made your decision. But, Emma, know that whatever you choose, you will always be my daughter, and I will always be available to help you if you need me. Emma took the card and headed toward the door.
As she reached for the handle, Adrian's voice stopped her.
Emma? Thank you for giving me the chance to explain.
And please tell your mother that I have never forgotten her courage and kindness, and that I deeply regret any fear or hardship my existence has caused her. Emma nodded and left the suite, her mind reeling with everything she had learned. When she reached the lobby, she found Maria waiting anxiously in one of the elegant chairs near the front desk.
How did it go? Maria asked as soon as she saw Emma approaching.
He's not what we expected, Emma said as they walked toward the hotel exit. Mom, he says he's my father, and he says he's a vampire, but he's not the monster we thought he was. They drove back to the motel in relative silence, both of them processing the evening's revelations. When they were safely back in their room, Emma shared everything Adrian had told her about vampires, blood bonds, and her supernatural heritage. He says you've been developing enhanced abilities too because of the blood bond, Emma said, watching her mother's reaction carefully. Maria was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly.
That would explain some things.
I've always been able to sense things about people, to know when they're lying or when they're in danger. I attributed it to maternal instinct, but it's been getting stronger over the years.
Emma sat down next to her mother on the bed.
He's offered to train me, to help me learn to control my abilities. He says there are others like me, that I'm part of a larger supernatural community.
What do you want to do?
Emma had been asking herself that question since leaving the hotel.
I think I want to learn more. I think I want to understand what I am and what I'm capable of. But I don't want to do it without you, Mom. Whatever happens next, we do it together.
Maria smiled and pulled her daughter into a hug. Then, I guess it's time for both of us to stop running and start embracing whatever comes next. Over the next few days, Emma contacted Adrian and arranged for both her and Maria to begin learning about their supernatural heritage. It was decided that they would remain in Chicago for several months while Emma received training and Maria learned to understand and control her own developing abilities. Adrian introduced them to a small but close-knit community of vampires, dampirs, and humans who were connected to the supernatural world. Emma discovered that she wasn't alone, that there were others who understood the challenges of straddling two worlds. She also learned that Adrian Drackle wasn't just any vampire, he was the leader of one of the oldest and most respected vampire families in North America, which explained both his resources and his enemies. Emma was not just a damper, but the daughter of what amounted to vampire royalty. As Emma developed her abilities under Adrian's guidance, she also developed a relationship with the father she had never known. It wasn't always easy, there were cultural differences and supernatural politics to navigate, but it was genuine and built on mutual respect and affection. Maria, for her part, found herself adapting to this new world with surprising ease. The enhanced ability she had been developing over the years became stronger and more controlled with proper training, and she discovered that she had a natural talent for bridging the gap between the human and supernatural communities. 6 months after that night in the Blackstone Hotel, Emma was sitting in the same park where she had first called out to Adrian Drackle. But now, instead of being filled with uncertainty and fear, she felt confident and empowered by her understanding of who she was and what she was capable of. Her mother joined her on the bench, and they sat together watching the sunset over Chicago.
Do you ever regret not running again? Maria asked. Emma considered the question.
Her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined when she first found that newspaper article in the university library. She had discovered that she was the daughter of a vampire king, that she possessed supernatural abilities, and that she was part of an ancient world that existed alongside the human world. No, Emma said finally. I don't regret it. For the first time in my life, I understand who I am and where I come from. And I have a father who loves me and wants to be part of my life. She looked at her mother, who had also been transformed by their journey. What about you? Do you regret coming back to Chicago? Maria smiled.
I regret the 21 years of fear and uncertainty.
But I don't regret anything that's happened since we decided to stop running. I finally have answers to questions that have haunted me for decades, and I've learned that sometimes the things we fear most turn out to be blessings in disguise. As the sun disappeared behind the Chicago skyline, Emma felt a sense of completeness that she had never experienced before. She had started this journey as a journalism student researching missing persons cases, and she had ended up discovering a family, a community, and a destiny that she never could have imagined. The photograph that had started it all, the image of Isabella Romano from the 1994 newspaper article, was now framed on the mantel of the elegant apartment Adrian had provided for them in downtown Chicago. It served as a reminder of how far they had come and how much their lives had changed. Emma Martinez had learned that sometimes the most important stories are the ones we discover about ourselves, and that sometimes the people we think are our enemies turn out to be our greatest allies. She had found her father, embraced her heritage, and discovered that being different wasn't something to hide from, but something to celebrate. And, in a penthouse apartment across town, Adrian Drackle stood at his window looking out over the city where he had once again found his family. For the first time in over 20 years, he felt complete, knowing that his daughter was safe, happy, and, finally, aware of the extraordinary legacy she had inherited. The story that had begun with a missing persons case had ended with a reunion that bridged two worlds and healed wounds that had been festering for over 2 decades. Emma had learned that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and that sometimes the most unlikely families are the strongest ones of all.